Good morning. My name is Lisa Goodman, and I'm the director of the DJ Kelly Law Library. I'm delighted to be here with my colleagues, Professor Dan Walters and Professor Aaron Ratine, who's here in the library to talk about open educational resources, or OERs.
Yeah, it's a good question. I had a colleague at a prior institution that put together his own OER resource for teaching administrative law, which is a course that I teach. And I took a look at his materials, and I was pretty impressed by what he was able to accomplish. A lot of materials in law are open access, public domain materials, cases, statutes, things like that. And most of what's in, law case books are those public domain materials. So, in a sense, there's no reason that we should have anything but OER resources. And I think seeing his materials opened my eyes to that. Uh, and then the other thing that led me to be interested in it was I came across a resource called H2O, run by the Harvard Case Law Access Project. And H2O has a very intuitive platform for creating your own OER resources in law. You can, seamlessly bring cases and statutes into a very functional outline form and then publish that online through their platform. And so, the combination of those two things, seeing what could be done from my colleagues' materials, and then seeing that there were tools available to make this, extremely easy on my part, led me to be interested in it. Yeah, I had never used OERs before. I had, I guess done something somewhat similar in some seminars, bringing in law review articles, various materials to kind of curate a class the way that I wanted it to be. But I had never, used an off-the-shelf OER resource or created anything like that before I created my own OER administrative law case book. Um, I think it's fairly common in undergraduate studies, and has really taken hold there. And in law school, for whatever reason, I think people have been a little bit more reluctant to take up OER resources, maybe partly because of a lack of information about what's available, and maybe partly a function of availability. There just aren't that many OER resources out there yet, but it's a growing trend. I never had any real experience with it, but I suspect going forward, it's going to be kind of the model. In fact, I'm already thinking about possibly creating other textbooks for other classes, because you can, so tailor the material to exactly what you want to teach. It's really remarkable how much control you have once you make that turn over to OER.
So it sounds like there wasn't necessarily anything out there that kind of fit what you were looking for. So you embarked on creating it. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. The easiest thing certainly would be to, just pull something off the shelf. And, if there were lots of choices available, then, that's probably, going to be what works for most people. In my situation, there really was just one open access administrative law casebook, and it was the one that my colleague made. And while I liked the casebook a lot, and I think he did a very good job with his materials, there were little things that were different from the way that I would do it, in terms of organization of the material, and, some cases that I wouldn't have included, those kinds of things. If I didn't have a really easy way to make my own materials, then I probably would have just adopted, his casebook, because it was the only choice available. But one thing I think everybody hopes is that if, more people put their own materials out there, if they're inspired to do it like I was, to maybe make things a little bit different from what's available on the market, eventually it will be the kind of thing that you can just sort of pull it off the shelf. There will be lots of different options. To what's I think a real advantage of H2O as a platform. I mentioned this earlier. This is the platform that I use to create my materials. It's very intuitive and easy for anybody to go into that resource, that platform, and to move things around and to add things to it. And they very much encourage this, right? So, once I put my casebook out there on the internet, and anybody can access it, they can also edit it into their own casebook. So they can subtract things, add things. And I think I'm excited about that. I'm excited to see what people do with kind of the shell that I put out there already. And ideally, in the future, there will be lots of permutations of my casebook. And maybe one of them will be better than the one that I put together, and I'll switch over to that one, right? So I think it's kind of the real advantage of OERs is that it's an evolving resource, and the market is growing, and eventually it will be fairly easy, I think, for people to just go out and pick among whatever casebook they think is the best. Again, going back to one of the real advantages of all of this, I think you can use the materials. There can be continuity. You can reuse things, but you also have a lot of flexibility to make very surgical revisions to your materials, adding new cases or whatever, and keep things up to date. I think one deterrent for a lot of people contemplating either doing OER resources or writing a traditional casebook is that they feel committed to keep that book up to date, and that can be a hassle, right? If you're working with a publisher, for instance, you've got to, every time they want to put out a new edition, you've got to, go out and do major revisions, coordinate with somebody else. There's a lot that goes into it. Whereas with the H2O platform, all I really have to do is go back to my casebook and just delete the things I don't like and put in the things that I like, right? And that's very seamless.
And so it sounds like it gives you a lot of flexibility to, like you said, very easily tailor the case book to the way you want to teach the course in any given year or semester. You can make those decisions quickly and easily.
Yeah, I think that's well said. That is exactly the main advantage from my vantage point of adopting OER materials. Yeah, I think it's generally a good thing for most people. I think there are probably some concerns that people have about the technology, the usability of the technology. And I think those are legitimate concerns, and certainly would have been even more legitimate even, just a few years ago, before things like H2O came along to make this really easy. But I would encourage anybody to at least go take a look at that platform, maybe other platforms that are available to help in creating OER resources, because I think even if you're skeptical about it, you're going to be surprised at how easy it is. That was certainly my experience. I was introduced to H2O. I saw a announcement for a talk by Professor Glenn Cohen at Harvard, who has made his own materials on civil procedure and teaches them to Harvard law students. And he did essentially a webinar on H2O where he went through his course and showed how he created his OER resource, showed the functionality of the various tools that it creates. And I remember just sitting there and watching him and thinking, why isn't everybody doing this? I mean, this is a shortcut in a lot of ways. And I went in somewhat skeptical. I mean, I certainly wanted to save my students money. That was my number one motivation, getting me off the ground with OER resources, the reason why I attended the webinar. But I expected it to be much more complicated than it was. And so I think, I would encourage anybody to take a look and just see if it's right for them. I think there probably are some people who, would be better off using more traditional materials. I don't think this is necessarily for everybody. But it's enough of an option that it's definitely worth considering for everybody. I think accessibility is such a key for so many technologies and people's willingness to adopt them. Like I think about clean energy technologies and things like that, EVs. Most people are totally willing to make a jump, a big technological jump, uh, but they're worried about like the logistical details. And so from my perspective, kind of 30,000-foot view, we make progress on things. We, adopt new technologies when, those logistical problems or concerns become minimal. And I think one of the things that we're experiencing with OER resources right now is the barriers to adoption are dissolving in front of our eyes. And you've got platforms like H2O and like Kali that are making it easier. And I think that's when things really change, when people can see that tangible evidence that, hey, this isn't so hard. I think one thing that is really nice about H2O in particular is that you can pretty easily take what you have produced, which is otherwise just an online resource, just a web page essentially, but export that into a PDF and edit it how you want, and then create a cover and then publish that as a physical book. I used Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing. There are other ways that you could do this as well, but the finished product is very nice. H2O has some default formatting, where when you export the finished product, it comes out basically with a table of contents and basically pretty polished, right? Kind of a standard format for cases and statutes and your introductory material, different fonts for different sections of the case book. So you don't have to do any of that work yourself. You have to do a little bit of cleanup work, where things, fell through the cracks. I mean, any kind of automated system like that, it's never going to be perfect, but you didn't have to start from scratch. It was basically press the export button, do a little bit of editing, put together a cover that you like, and send it off for publishing. It couldn't have been easier, really. And I think it's pretty cool when you self-publish a book and you actually get it in your hands, right? I know I told a lot of my students, you can just get the free PDF. That's fine. You can just, I allow people to use computers in my classroom. So, it's not a problem to just have the purely online or PDF resource. But many of the students went ahead and got the physical copy anyway. I think partly because they like, having something, in hand when they go to class. And also because I think they were really impressed with my cover, which is really pretty.
So was it important to you that students have the option to get a physical copy?
Yeah, no, I insisted on that. You know, I was a little worried at first that it would be hard to do this, and it was a bit of a drawback because I know some students, rely on printed material. They don't like to read on a computer screen. I don't like to read on a computer screen. Blue light and all those other concerns, right? So I knew that it would be much more accessible for students if they had a print version, and it's not really feasible, to tell them, hey, you could just print off the PDF, all 800 pages of this of this PDF. So I didn't want that to be their only option. And when I learned that it really was pretty seamless and simple to put together the materials and have it printed from a relatively professional outlet like Amazon, that made a difference for me. I found that the process of getting that all set up was pretty easy, and the cost ultimately wasn't very high. I worried a bit about that as well, that, if I had some kind of, finished product here that was printed off, had a fancy cover and everything, it would, end up being somewhat, expensive, maybe, taking away some of the advantage of OER resources. But, the finished price tag, I think, was around $25. And, that's just covering the bare cost of printing and all of that, right? But to me, that's pretty low. And I think for most students, that's pretty low, especially relative to other casebooks. So yeah, I mean, when I found out that it was possible to do this, again, it kind of pushed me to get a move on and try to put these materials together.
I wonder, have you noticed any student reactions, positive or negative, to you using OERs in your classroom?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's trade-offs with every choice you make, right? And I certainly think the students love that this is inexpensive. So I've already heard students talking about that. They really appreciate that they don't have to spend $200 to $300 on a casebook for one class. I mean, students are taking, 5 or 6 classes a semester. If every casebook costs $300, you do the math. That's a pretty hefty bill, right? And so, I was able to offer my materials for free in PDF form, and then, in print form via Amazon Kindle Direct Publishing, in a printed version for, I think it was around $20 or $25 or something like that. And so, it's, I think students really appreciate that they can, not have to worry about spending that kind of money on casebooks that they may not even hold on to for the rest of their career. We always used to say, or I used to say, the reason why we're making you buy these $300 case books is because they're going to be a resource for you for the rest of your life, right? You can consult your case books when you're out in practice. And the reality is no one's going to do that, right? Like, law firms have their own libraries, access to all resources that they might need to do their research in their jobs. So it's, that was always a bit of a fanciful claim that we were making. And I don't think it really justifies the expense. And I think students know that too. So, being able to give them something that's free, they really appreciate that. On the flip side, though, I put together the materials pretty quickly over the course of a summer. And there are lots of typos and things like that I'm finding as I work through the materials. I didn't have a good chance to really do a big proofread before I put it out there. And part of that's not my fault. It's just a lot of these cases that I included were OCR'd, so digitally scanned, and then there's imperfections in the sort of recognition of text, right? And so you're going to miss a lot of that stuff, and there's going to be a lot of typos in the materials if you use the H2O platform. In theory, you could correct all of that, but if you're time crunched, maybe not. And I have had some students say, you really should have a copy editor go through this and correct some of these mistakes. And I'm like, yeah, but do you want a $300 book, or would you prefer the free book, right? With some typos. So, in the future, I'll correct all of that when I have time to really do a thorough proofread. But I think that's one possible risk. Whenever you take on a big project like this, especially if you've got lots of other things that you're balancing, there's a chance that, sometimes you're going to miss some things or make a mistake. And then it's a little bit more work on the back end to kind of clean that up, right?